Now, I have two daughters, and one thing is clear to me. There is a culture clash between Gen Z, millennials, and people of my generation. People who were born in Africa, relocated abroad to countries like the United Kingdom, United States, Canada, and so on. There is this culture clash that is happening. I mean, the reasons for this culture clash are pretty obvious because we now live abroad. Our children are being exposed to other cultures. So sometimes our kids experience this culture conflict because they are caught between two worlds, especially if the child is born in the UK or in another country, because all they're trying to do is to balance these two cultures. They're trying to balance their African heritage with their Britishness. And if they live in America, they're also trying to balance with the culture of the host country. And unfortunately, sometimes this leads to our children favoring one country over another. If a child is born in the UK, for instance, they may say, you know what, I prefer the British culture and not the Zimbabwe culture. So how do you deal with that? Because I'm a Zimbabwean who was born in Africa, spent a considerable amount of time in Africa, and I was socialized in Africa, in Zimbabwe. So I've got these Zimbabwean traditions that are ingrained in me. And there are certain traditions, Zimbabwean traditions, that I feel strongly about, traditions that I'm passionate about. And I feel that any child of mine, or I can even go as far as saying, I feel that if you're African or if you're a child of an African parent, then you ought to be upholding these traditions. You ought to be, at the very least, acknowledging and respecting them. It appears, I mean, listening to the videos, listening to my own daughters, the conversation that we have, I mean, to be fair, I can't say that my daughters are rejecting my culture. No, but there's a clash. There are areas where we are clashing. This is what I want to talk about in this video because I've realized, even conversations with other moms, I'm realizing that Gen Z and millennials are rejecting not everything, but they are rejecting some of our African traditions, our cultural norms. They are starting to resist them. Now, another area where this culture clash comes into play is to do with our values. Now, I speak for myself as a Zimbabwean. We have our values as Zimbabweans, and one of our values is respecting our elders. And I'm sure other African countries as well have got similar values. I mean, this is an African thing. According to what I understand, it's an African thing and it's a good thing. It's part of that Ubuntu I keep going on about. Now, there's a video that I watched on TikTok. I saved the video. Unfortunately, when I went back to look at the video, to watch it again, it had gone. But the young lady was saying that she hasn't spoken to her parents for more than a decade. And according to her, she's at peace because her parents were toxic. They met at a wedding. And because she felt she was the one who was wronged by her parents, she wasn't going to walk up to them and greet them. She stayed away. They were at the same wedding. So her mom decided, you know what? I'm not going to go up to her and greet her. Instead, her mom should have been the one to come to her and greet her because she was the one who was right. I mean, they didn't talk to each other. They're still not talking. And she says she's at peace. That's what she says. And reading the comments, a lot of Gen Z, a lot of millennials are taking her side. And also in the comments, there were people who were saying that you can't be at peace if you're not talking to your parents. And I tend to agree because I once fell out with my parents as well. I mean, a long time ago. It wasn't that kind of a falling out where I go for days, weeks, months, years without talking to my parents. I mean, as an African woman, I can't fathom that. I mean, it's not something we do. But the argument is culture shouldn't supersede what is morally right. Now, I can see where the young lady is coming from. And yes, I agree. If something is right, it is right. You can't argue with that. I mean, it is obvious. But according to my experience as a Zimbabwean woman, as a child who grew up in Zimbabwe, this is what usually happened. There were times when my parents were wrong and they knew they were wrong. I know that because they later came back to say it to me. But at the time, when we were falling out or when we were arguing or when I was kicking off as a teenager or a young lady, at the time, my parents wanted me to respect them, even though they were wrong and they knew they were wrong. But I had to watch what I said to them. I had to respect the fact that they were my parents. The way I respected them was not to tell them or to admit that, okay, it's fine, you're right, that sort of thing. No, that's not how I respected them. I respected them sometimes by keeping quiet. When they were shouting at me, saying all sorts, I kept quiet. I left the room, locked myself in my room, cried, did whatever I did in there. Or I respected them by choosing my words carefully. I would let them know that they are wrong without actually telling them that. What would happen was that later on, when everybody was calm, when the tempers had cooled down, my parents would come back to me and apologize. My dad was a scary man. I was scared of him. But even him, with his scary self, he would come to me and apologize. There were times when he wouldn't come out and say I was wrong. At times he would say that. And those times were few, but the many times he apologized to me. He did it in his own way, in a way that preserved his dignity as a parent. My dad would come and say things like, tete munombo penga nditi, munovava. In translation, that means, yeah, auntie, you can kick off. So him calling me auntie or aunt was his way of respecting me, acknowledging that I was right after all. Because in Zimbabwe, if you're an aunt or if you're a tete, because that's what aunt means, you are in a position of authority or you are seen as the peacemaker of the family. That's what one of the roles of tetes in Zimbabwe. So my dad calling me tete was his way of acknowledging that he was wrong. I am the peacemaker. I am the one who is right. So yeah, this is why I say our African culture is rich if we take the time to understand it and to follow it, practice it in the manner that it was intended, because everything is structured. The African culture, all those cultural traditions, norms, they're there for a reason. Again, watch my video on the Zimbabwean culture. I explain everything. I speak for the Zimbabwean culture because I am from Zimbabwe, but I'm sure most Africans can relate to what I'm saying. African culture is there for a reason. It is structured. But now, because we are not practicing it in the manner that it was intended, our children are starting to resist our culture because we are not teaching it properly. This is my opinion. This is how I feel about things, because whenever I sit my daughters down to explain our culture, why it is there in the first place, and what happened in the olden days and everything, I see the appreciation in their eyes. I mean, their eyes lit up. I see that in the change in attitude. So I genuinely feel that as parents, the onus is on us to teach our children our culture and to do it the right way so that they can appreciate it, so that their attitude towards our African culture can change. So yeah, I don't know what you think about everything that I've said. If you're a Gen Z, if you're a millennial, what are your thoughts about the African culture? Do you appreciate it? Do you practice it? What do you think? And if you're an African parent, or if you're married to someone from Africa, if you come from another culture, how do you navigate the culture clash?